Imagine a caravan winding its way across the arid stretches of the Taklamakan Desert, the wind hissing like ancient whispers over the sand. Among the goods, silks, spices, and precious stones, rides something invisible, yet infinitely more enduring: an idea. That idea is Buddhism. When Buddhism first reached the borders of China more than 2,000 years ago, it arrived as an exotic foreign faith from India. Its monks chanted in unknown tongues, its scriptures were written in alien scripts, and its worldview was steeped in concepts like karma, reincarnation, and nirvana that had no precedent in Chinese thought. And yet, over the centuries, this Indian import would not only take root, but ultimately reshape the very soul of Chinese civilization. This is the story of how Buddhism changed China, not merely as a religion, but as a transformative force in philosophy, art, politics, and society. It is a story of translation and adaptation, of imperial patronage and persecution, of cave temples and philosophical debates, of wandering monks and celestial bodhisattvas. It is, in many ways, a story of China itself. The earliest recorded contact between China and Buddhism dates to the Han Dynasty around the 1st century CE, during a time when the imperial court was increasingly curious about the lands beyond its western frontier. The Silk Road had opened new corridors of exchange, not just for goods, but for ideas. According to legend, Emperor Ming of Han reigned 57 to 75 CE, dreamed of a golden figure flying through the air, interpreted by his ministers as the Buddha. In response, the emperor dispatched emissaries to India, who returned with Buddhist scriptures and monks. A white horse carried these sacred texts, giving birth to the famous White Horse Temple in Luoyang, traditionally considered the first Buddhist temple in China. But even before this imperial overture, merchants and monks from Central Asia, especially from the Kushan Empire, had already begun planting seeds of the Dharma along the Silk Road. The earliest forms of Buddhism in China were often Mahayana, emphasizing bodhisattvas and universal salvation, and tailored for lay practitioners rather than monastic elites. At first, Buddhism was a curiosity, tolerated, even welcomed, but clearly foreign. It clashed with Confucian values of filial piety and loyalty to earthly authority, and its rejection of the world flew in the face of Chinese pragmatism. Yet this very strangeness was part of its appeal. In a time of social upheaval and dynastic change, Buddhism offered an otherworldly solace and a promise of spiritual liberation. To change a civilization, a religion must first be understood. And so the long and arduous process of translating Buddhist scriptures into Chinese began, an endeavor that would span centuries and involve some of the most brilliant minds of their age. Among the most important figures in this epical task was Kumarajva, 344 to 413 CE, a Central Asian monk of extraordinary linguistic fluency and philosophical insight. After being captured and brought to the Chinese court, Kumarajva led a massive translation project in Chang'an, producing Chinese versions of key Mahayana texts like the Lotus Sutra and the Diamond Sutra. His translations combined precision with literary elegance, making them enduring classics. But translation was never a mere linguistic exercise. It was an act of cultural negotiation. Many Buddhist concepts had no equivalent in Chinese thought. For example, the idea of shunyata, emptiness, was initially baffling to Chinese readers steeped in Confucian and Taoist categories. Translators often borrowed Taoist terminology to bridge the gap, leading to a unique hybridization known as gei, or concept matching. Over time, these efforts gave rise to distinctly Chinese forms of Buddhism. Schools like Tiantai, Huayan, and Chan, later known as Zen in Japan, synthesized Indian doctrine with Chinese cosmology and metaphysics. Buddhism was no longer a foreign faith, it was becoming Chinese. As Buddhism gained a foothold in Chinese society, It attracted the attention and resources of political elites. Nowhere was this more evident than in the Northern Wei Dynasty, 386 to 534 CE, a time when Chinese and non-Chinese rulers alike turned to Buddhism to legitimize their rule and unify their realms. The Northern Wei, founded by the Tuoba clan of Xianbei nomads, embraced Buddhism with fervor. Emperor Xiaowen reigned 471 to 499, not only promoted Buddhism, but also adopted Han Chinese customs and Confucian bureaucracy, using Buddhism as a bridge between cultures. Under imperial patronage, vast cave temple complexes, such as Yungang and Longmen, were carved into cliffs, adorned with colossal statues of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. These monuments were expressions of both piety and political propaganda. Buddhist monasteries grew in wealth and influence, becoming centers of learning, charity, and economic activity. They owned land, collected donations, and even minted their own money in some cases. Monks advised emperors and served as diplomats. The Sangha, the Buddhist monastic community, had become an institution as powerful as any in China. Yet this very power provoked suspicion. Confucian scholars accused monks of shirking familial duties and undermining social order. Taoists, meanwhile, saw Buddhism as a foreign rival. These tensions would erupt in periodic persecutions, the most severe of which came during the Tang Dynasty in the 9th century. The Tang Dynasty, 618 to 907 CE, marks the zenith of Buddhist influence in China. It was a time of cosmopolitanism, wealth, and cultural efflorescence, and Buddhism was at the heart of it all. Nowhere was this more evident than in the capital city of Chang'an, a bustling metropolis where Indian monks debated with Central Asian scholars and Chinese pilgrims returned from distant journeys bearing scriptures and relics. The monk Xuanzang, 602 to 664 CE, perhaps the most famous of these travelers, journeyed to India in search of authentic Buddhist teachings. Upon his return, he translated some of the most important works of Indian philosophy, including the massive Yogacarabhumi Shastra, laying the foundations for the Faxiang school of thought. Meanwhile, brilliant Chinese thinkers such as Zhiyi, 538 to 597 CE, of the Tiantai school, and Fazang, 643 to 712 CE, of the Huayan school, developed sophisticated metaphysical systems that rivaled anything in the Western philosophical tradition. Huayan, in particular, proposed a dazzling vision of reality in which all phenomena interpenetrate, each thing reflecting the whole, like jewels in the Indra's net. But perhaps the most quintessentially Chinese expression of Buddhism was Chan, a school that emphasized meditation, intuition, and direct experience over scripture and ritual. Drawing on Taoist sensibilities, Chan masters like Huineng, 638 to 713, taught that enlightenment was not a distant goal, but an ever-present potential. Their terse, paradoxical sayings, called gongan or koans, would later inspire generations of Zen practitioners across East Asia. During this golden age, Buddhist art, literature, and philosophy flourished. Temples dotted the landscape, from the forests of Sichuan to the shores of the Yangtze. Pilgrims and poets alike found solace in the teachings of the Buddha. The religion had not only penetrated the Chinese heartland, it had become a part of the Chinese heart. Yet no flower blooms forever. In 845 CE, under the Tang Emperor Wuzong, Buddhism suffered its greatest blow. Driven by a combination of economic motives, xenophobic sentiment, and Taoist influence, Wuzong ordered the suppression of Buddhism across the empire. Over 4,600 monasteries were destroyed, hundreds of thousands of monks and nuns were defrocked, and countless scriptures were lost. The Great Persecution marked a turning point. Although Buddhism would never vanish from China, it would never again enjoy the same level of state sponsorship and cultural dominance. The Sangha was forced to become more self-sufficient, relying on lay patronage and localized networks. In the centuries that followed, Buddhism adapted once more. It became more introspective, more syncretic. It blended more deeply with Confucian ethics and Taoist cosmology. Popular sects like Pure Land Buddhism, which emphasized faith in the celestial Buddha Amitabha and the promise of rebirth in a Western paradise, appealed to the common people in ways that abstruse philosophy could not. Though battered, Buddhism endured. It had become too deeply woven into the fabric of Chinese life to be uprooted. So, how did Buddhism change China? First, it introduced a new cosmology and metaphysics, a vision of samsara, karma, and enlightenment that reoriented Chinese thought toward the inner world of the mind and the afterlife. Second, it redefined compassion and morality, expanding ethical concern beyond the family and state to all sentient beings. Vegetarianism, animal compassion, and charity became Buddhist virtues that permeated Chinese society. Third, Buddhism revolutionized Chinese art and literature. From the cave murals of Dunhuang to the poetic meditations of Wang Wei, Buddhist imagery and themes enriched the cultural imagination. Fourth, it forged new institutions, monasteries, translation bureaus, pilgrimage routes that reshaped the social and political landscape. It offered new roles for women, new paths for the poor, and new ideals for scholars. Fifth, and perhaps most profoundly, Buddhism changed how the Chinese understood the self. Where Confucianism had emphasized one's role in society, Buddhism invited introspection, a journey inward. It introduced meditation, mindfulness, and the idea that ultimate truth lay beyond words. Finally, Buddhism helped China become a global civilization. Through Buddhism, China engaged in centuries-long dialogue with India, Central Asia, Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. It was a conduit of cross-cultural exchange, a shared language of the sacred. In the grand tapestry of Chinese history, Buddhism was both a mirror and a lamp. It reflected the values, anxieties, and hopes of Chinese society, while also illuminating new paths of thought and being. It began as a foreign faith carried by monks and merchants across mountains and deserts. But over time, it became one of the great pillars of Chinese civilization, a source of solace, wisdom, and artistic inspiration. Even today, echoes of its teachings can be heard in the quiet halls of ancient temples, seen in the serene smile of a stone Buddha, and felt in the stillness of meditation. Buddhism may have come from India, but in China, it found a second home, a home it helped to transform forever. And so we remember not only how Buddhism changed China, but how China, in turn, changed Buddhism. In their long embrace, both were transformed into something richer, deeper, and enduring.